Thanks so much for joining. I'm Taylor Bellhouse, Managing Director of Events here at Cred. Welcome to our latest Cred webinar. I'm thrilled to facilitate today's discussion on a topic I'm particularly passionate about, making diverse voices a priority at events and conferences. Today, I'm joined by three amazing panelists: Lily Gangas, Chief Technology Community Officer at the Procore Center; Valerie Jackson, Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Procore; and Wahab Owolabi, founder of URX. Thank you all so much for joining. We are going to get into intros a little bit deeper in just a moment, but I have a couple of housekeeping items for everyone that's tuning in. So thank you so much for joining. You'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, there's a little chat function there. We'd love to hear from you and hear where you're tuning in from. So go ahead and drop us a note there. Let us know where your home base is. And also use this chat throughout the session to submit your questions. So we will have dedicated time at the end of the conversation to take as many of your questions as we can. We really want this to be an interactive discussion. So feel free to drop those in at any time throughout the session. And then also, if you do have to leave or drop off, know that this is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with you post-event via email later the next day or so, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really should be an undeniable priority for everyone in every industry right now, more than ever before. And for event organizers and conference planners, I think we have a really unique and exciting role in this to ensure that we can make diverse voices and make sure that they are elevated on stages and now on screens that we have all shifted to virtual. So with this conversation, we're really going to just be talking about the tactics and the best practices that you can do to keep those things front of mind. So I'm really excited to kick things off with our amazing panel. Would love to hear just short intros from each of you about what you do and how you're involved with conferences and events. So Lily, you want to get us started with a brief intro?
Sure. Hello all, my name is Lily Gangas. I'm the Chief Technology Community Officer at the Procore Center. We're really focused on increasing the diversity in tech and entrepreneurship. We want to make sure that these fields are representative at parity of the community, specifically communities of color. In my role in all of this, I've been able to, throughout it's almost a little bit past 4 years, I'm going into my 5th year at the center, has been a part of a lot of different types of experiences and events. And so especially those that are very specific towards as a community. And so for me as a Latina, I'll share a little bit more examples of how we've actually reached out to the Latinx community in new ways as well.
Great. Thanks, Lily. Valerie, would love to hear from you.
Thanks, Taylor, and thanks for having me on today. Hi, everyone. My name is Valerie Jackson. I lead inclusion and diversity at Procore Technologies. We are a cloud-based construction management software company, and I've been leading inclusion and diversity efforts for, am I going to say the number? Almost 15 years, although in the legal industry. And even though I have crossed into the tech industry, one common thread in my work has been to create spaces for people to come together, to learn, to crowdsource solutions, to make themselves heard. And we do that through public and private events. And so I am also passionate about this topic, and I'm excited to learn from my fellow panelists and be here today.
Thanks, Valerie. Wahab, you're up next.
Hey, it's actually really hard to come up last behind those two phenomenal panelists, so I don't envy myself right now, but I'm glad to be here, really passionate about what we're going to be discussing. My name is Wahab Owolabi. I'm the founder of URX, which is a community of recruiters, predominantly in the early career space. Started it about 4 years ago with an event, I kid you not, in an office building. I won't name the company that was crazy enough to allow us to do that. Had about 100 or so people attend that first event. And from there, the power of events, we created a community. And now we serve that community through events across the country, virtually, and with an annual conference. I'm also a diversity business partner at Facebook. And through that work, also consider, how events can really move the needle in terms of recruiting and operations.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. And that's what, I mean, common thread that I just love is that we all see the value of events and the community building and really the grassroots efforts that can happen there. So that's why I think as event organizers, we all just have such a great gift and opportunity to make sure that DE&I stays top of everyone's mind. So, kicking off, I think just the definition of diversity, we all know it can be defined in a multitude of ways. Gender, ethnicity, age, geographic location, your job title, your type of company, the list goes on and on. So would love to hear from you guys. How do you approach defining your own DE&I strategies for your events? And where would you recommend that other event organizers start? So Lily, let's take it back to you if you want to take the lead on this one.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I think especially for us at the Caper Center, we have an amazing set of research around how to actually increase representation of people of color, specifically Black and Latinx and other underrepresented groups in the technology sector. And so we have this guided format or a framework that it's called the Leaky Tech Pipeline that encourage folks to check out. And so for me specifically, it's worth when I've been able to curate events, which I like to call experiences or learning experiences, is that really just starting with like the why and the what. What is the problem or barrier that you're looking to tackle? Why are you hosting this event? Who is facing it, right? And so that's a part that we want to make sure that, at least in my experience, understanding who am I trying to reach? Who has this problem? Very similar, like a startup does, right? Like, who's your customer? What's the problem? Very similar type of approach. And doubling down into specifically the person that might be facing this barrier or problem. What is the best way to reach them? And this is where the inclusive design mentality and approach is super critical in being able to understand, well, what are the barriers that they might have? What is the level of information that needs to be maybe shared as context? And then ultimately, what is the best format, right? To be able to have this, either a dialogue, is it a learning? Is it an opportunity to share in a maybe more interactive manners? And ultimately, it's like, what is the next action step that you want that the people that have come together to take after they leave? And I think that this is a really important point to have, because you want to make sure that it's not just to bring people together and that was it. It's ultimately, what is the longer term change that you're looking to see? What's your overall strategy of why are you even investing the time and resources? And a lot of the times, even from my own experience, I'm just learning on the ground as well in previous careers. It was always a part that I was like, wait, did we ask the right questions? How do we know that this worked or didn't, right? And so being able, especially now that we are in this more virtual world, I think it provides us the opportunity to leverage different tools and technologies in new ways that can help us better gauge and understand if the event reached its goals. Did people leave learning something? And for me, that's always a very specifically important point, is did somebody that came to an event or an experience that I helped organize, did they leave with something new? Do they know what their next step is to take? Ultimately, is that I helped them tackle the problem or barrier that we wanted to tackle together. And so I think that those are some of the approaches that I have just overall in general from a DEI specifically. I think, for example, when we worked with community college students out and when we were able to bring people together a few years ago, it was understanding what is the image, the language, how do we reach them? And then once they come into the Caper Center, what's the flow, right? How do we make them feel that this is a space for them? And so there is a lot of different formats, and we have an amazing events team at the Caper Center. I want to give a shout out to them because they're the ones that make all the magic happen. And now in this virtual world as well, I think being able to have a team that has that experience and has that touch of understanding and being really just, obsessed with the people that we're bringing together and what are their needs and making sure that it stays inclusive from that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. Just knowing your audience. And like you said, like a startup world, same questions that you're asking yourself, like ask yourself that as an event organizer too, of who you're talking to. Valerie, Wahab, any other kind of thoughts on where someone could start with diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So I think one of the things that we used to do, at least I used to do when we had in-person events, I hope they come back safely at some point in the near future, is I would always walk the venue with the mindset of the attendee. And I would choose different stakeholders. So I'd walk the venue with the mindset of, let's say, one of my sponsors. All right, they're coming in. This is going to be the experience. We have a lounge here. We have potential attendees over here. How does this translate into their experience? I do the same thing with my attendees. Little details that really matter when you run events, such as like, where are the restrooms? Are there enough restrooms? Where are the snacks? Where is the coffee? And I think when it comes to DI, in terms of your events, you need to do the same thing. And so you need to put yourself in the mindset of the people that you're serving, and not just one profile and not just one, one perspective, right? So I can't go through a virtual event and think only of a male experience, right? I can't just think of myself, right? And sometimes that means that I've got to work with my team, reach out to other folks and ask them, hey, can you take a look at this agenda? Can you take a look at this content that we're thinking about putting together? I would value your perspective on how would you experience this? And that then informs some of the decisions that you can make.
Yeah, I love that.
I would yes and to everything I've heard, right? Shout out to the amazing teams who help pull these off. The creative, the events, the comms, all the components of the marketing teams for those of us within companies. And also trying on someone else's experience and perspective. I love it. When you ask how we should define diversity and inclusion for purposes of our events, I think of looking at diversity as difference. Who do you have on your planning team and who do you not have? Build for the opposites, right? Who do you plan to reach out to? Whom do you think will be attendees? And then who is not in that pool? Again, see if you can capture the opposites. And because who's building and crafting is just as important as who you're attracting, right? Who you're inviting. Both groups of people have power, right? And so that's the diversity piece that I think about. The inclusion piece is just how people feel. How everyone who touches the environment from inception to completion and sending out your wrap-ups, right? How are people experiencing it? Do they feel like they're part of it? Do they feel like they belong in the team meetings to plan it and in the spaces where they're engaging with it? And of course, do they feel respected and valued and treated well and ideally inspired?
Yeah. No, I love the idea, Wahab, I love your idea of walking and kind of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And Valerie, what you're saying is like, then taking that a step further and saying, what's missing from here? Who's not here? Ask your partner, ask your other people on your team. I think that's just so important because, well, even if we all care about it, we all only have singular experiences ourselves. So we have to go to our partners and ask other people for help too, and make sure that those teams are built diversely as well.
Sorry, just to add there as well, just from a cultural perspective, having somebody who has the lived journey of the audience you're trying to reach, because we've seen so many events, granted, maybe they were well-meaning, but they just come out totally tone deaf to, and sometimes insulting to whoever is on the other end. If there's a cultural misrepresentation, if you didn't have that person, this is why it goes back to the representation matters in the composition of the team and the topic and whatnot. And if it's an event that maybe it's not in your wheelhouse, partners, I think that's a real good opportunity to bring in additional support.
Yeah, Lily, I love that. That's actually a great segue to my next question, which is, I think a lot of event organizers and maybe even, marketing and comms people like you mentioned, Valerie, like some people have a little bit of a hesitation because they're also worried about coming across authentically. And they want to make sure that, that they're taking a stance, but can avoid being what could be perceived as performative or maybe promoting tokenism. So I think that this is something that, that could be a common worry for some event organizers. So what advice do you guys have, and maybe some do's and don'ts, to make sure that people are coming across in an authentic way and whatever they're trying to do from a diversity and inclusion perspective doesn't come across as performative? Wahab, you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, so it's interesting because now I'm thinking about the like what are the goals, right? So, my first question is, what are your goals? With any event, especially if you're within a business, or you're even supporting a community, there are going to be goals and outcomes that you're looking for. And so it has to be authentic, and it has to be something that's frankly part of your organization's DNA. And if it is, then it's not performative to say, hey, we want to make sure that perspectives and voices that reflect what we believe in and reflect whether it's our community, whether it's our customers, whether it's our employees, are well represented across all of our event offerings. That doesn't mean that every single event is going to touch every single topic or content or perspective, but it means that over the course of your event strategy, you are making those considerations. And back to the earlier question, I think there's a segue here in terms of getting that feedback. Right. And so I don't think that anybody who runs events does it with just their own vision of what it should be. And I love how Lily considers this an experience. Well, we're designing experiences for an audience. And so if you're not asking that audience, what they would like out of this experience, you're doing something terribly wrong. So there's your don't, right? Don't design an experience that you want, design an experience that your audience wants. And that has to include who they want to hear from and what representation you don't have, and making sure that you go out and you're very deliberate, right, but not performative of making sure that representation is there. So maybe that's a do. Be deliberate, don't be performative.
Yeah, love that. Valerie and Lily, I know we all kind of have a lot of thoughts around this. So any other do's and don'ts?
We're right now in Latinx Heritage Month, right? And we don't even have to get into like the whole Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, but even that's a conversation, because even the naming and branding of how it utilizes, at least for that example, right? It might actually bring in different types of audiences. And for us, we specifically say Latinx. But it's those nuances of what is the most inclusive terminology, and are you into what is the most up to date type of thing, right? And that just in like the wording. And so I would say that the wording is very, very important. And this is why, especially in DI, I'm so glad that there's these conversations are being had. So then that way the folks know and be like, okay, you know what? Let me make sure of like their resources and tools. So now I know what verbiage is appropriate to use as well, because there is a lot of nuance on that aspect. I would say also just some don'ts, and I've heard so many horror stories, but just going on the thread of the Latinx Heritage Month, where when they decide like, yeah, we're going to do something for the Latinx community, and everything is around celebrating the Mexican culture. I'm Bolivian is very different when you have different folks from Argentina, Brazil, or different areas. And that's the one thing that you're saying, like, and here's the reflection of the entire community. When you come into the event, as I would feel totally like disregarded and insulted, and I'll be like, what is happening here, right? And so I think that there is that type of real talk to be had, and you would be surprised which types of organizations have done this. We've even seen it in product releases, right? So we don't even have to even think that it's that far out of the imagination to think that something like that could happen even at a product level, let alone the event. So this is where it's really important to make sure that to Wahab's points, what is the goal? Who's your audience, and how do they feel reflected? Does your team have a voice that represents the audience you're trying to reach? And so just going back to my other point, bring in the experts, bring in community, but also don't, and I've heard it from other folks that are working in tech, if you're the only person of color, let's say you're the only Latina, and then they're like, they bring you into this event, now you became more or less a Q&A, and that's not even your job. So I would just say be mindful of how you are also tapping into the rest of your teammates and saying like, well, so-and-so said it was great, but did that person even have an opportunity to wait, to even feel that that's even their role? And so I would just say be very mindful as well of your team composition to avoid these types of faux pas. And also just know, like, be as transparent as possible of like what you feel comfortable and what you do know and what you don't know. And when you don't make time to have the right conversation, and if it's not sometimes it's better not to even have it, to be honest. Sometimes it's better to just take a little bit more time to get it right.
Yeah. I think that that's so important to sort of think of now too, when I feel like people probably feel a pressure, right? Like this timeliness of getting something out there. But if you're not the right voice to do it, or you don't have the right voice on your team, it may be better to until you can get it right and get the right person on your team to make sure that happens right. It happens in the best way. Valerie, any other thoughts on avoiding anything performative?
Yes. I don't know if it's going to be controversial, but let's be real. Not everyone cares in the same way. And you need to be realistic and honest about your priorities, because performative to me is like, is it superficial or is it real? Are you doing something because you care, or are you doing something because everyone else is doing something?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're doing something because everyone else is doing something, you can design and strategize all you want. It may still very well come across that you're doing it just to do it. And you know I'm passionate because now my Georgia accent's coming out. If, however, you're doing it because you care, then you're more likely to be thoughtful about the layers of meaning that your messages are conveying. So if, for example, you are passionate about allyship, or you're passionate about promoting diverse voices, you won't just have a side dish panel on allyship or a side dish panel on diversity. You are going to weave it throughout in the messages, in the voices, in the behaviors. And so for me, that is what demonstrates the depth of your passion around the topic. You don't have to be an expert.
Right.
There are experts out there, right? But you do need to decide whether or not you care.
Yeah. I love
Because
that.
if you don't care, which is within your right as a sovereign human to care about the things you care about and not care about things you don't care about, but it will come across, I think.
Yeah. I think that, so this is actually another great segue into our next question is, we're talking about like how to get started and some of the things to keep in mind, making sure you have a diverse team, making sure you're asking, asking the right questions of why you're doing this. But Valerie, would love to hear from you about like, what are the actual tactical steps you can do to get into some of those layers? So like how does someone start, and like, what do they actually need to do aside just from, maybe having a vision and caring about it? Like, let's assume someone does care about it. They have the vision. They want to make it happen. What's the next step from there?
Next step is to be honest about your knowledge level, right? And if you don't know a lot about the topic or how to craft an event centering this topic, find people who do and be open about your willingness to learn with and from them. And then think about how, again, you're structuring your building team, right? Who is on the team that's building this event?
Mm-hmm.
And then process is really important. Process is important because it helps us mitigate the biases we don't know we have and slow down our thinking to make it more strategic. So a process could be as simple as a checklist, right? Have a checklist about like, have we examined all of our panels for these 3 layers of diversity? Have we examined our event site? Well, when we had events and sites, have we examined our event site for accessibility? Have we examined how our event will come across for people who don't have any of the 5 senses or don't have access to any of the 5 senses? Speaking as someone who has diminished hearing, when I go to events and conferences that have screens that show transcription, I'm like, I'm supporting you. I am coming back, and I'm sitting in the front row so I can understand what they're saying and read those screens. And
Right.
So you could build a checklist of who you're including, how you're building, who you're building for, which itself can demonstrate your commitment.
Yeah. Well,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We love a checklist. Organizing events.
And then one more thing. I am a proponent of codes of conduct, behavior pledges, because actually, I had an experience once at a trade association conference, and my experience was the reason that they created a code of conduct and behavior pledge to protect people like me who had a negative experience.
Wow.
And when we have events where people convene, it doesn't have to be in person. It can even be via Zoom. There may be people who make others feel uncomfortable. What standards are we setting? How are we holding ourselves and our attendees accountable to creating a safe, open, and welcome environment for all?
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, it goes back again to like asking yourself, you have to have self-awareness about what you want to even get to that point, right? To create those core values. So we'll have, going back to what you were saying, why are you doing this event? Who are you talking to? Knowing your target audience, what do you want? Like those are things that, we all need to be asking ourselves and then making sure that's put out there for attendees too, to make sure that we're drawing the right audience as well.
Yeah. And, I kind of I love those points. And I mean, I almost feel like sometimes we need to make a separation between the event industry and just the whole concept of events and what it means to have a diverse and inclusive mindset as you approach them, versus just the business, frankly, case that you have to do this. I love that we have somebody who's on the internal side of this program, and I know Cred works with a lot of different companies putting on events. And so if you have a company, for example, where they're putting on their huge flagship sales conference, and every single panel is full of potential customers or current customers who are all from companies that are 5,000 plus. The sales folks in your team that work with startups where it's 500 or less people, they're going to come knocking down your door. We've got no representation. And
right.
To me, I use that example all the time because this is no different. You've got to be able to say to yourself, hey, look, are we making sure that we're touching on every side of this? And the same way you would think about making sure that the right audience is being represented, you also have to think about that in terms of who's delivering the message, right? Because you get the messaging right, but if it's being delivered by the wrong perspective or the wrong person, or there's no representation of that perspective, you completely missed the boat anyway.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, and you guys are all diverse, incredible thought leaders, and you're being asked to be those voices on stage to make sure that different audiences are able to be addressed. And you've been gracious enough to join us on this session too, which we very much appreciate. But what advice do you have then for event organizers who are approaching diverse speakers and partners who are probably being inundated right now? Lily, do you have any thoughts around this about the best way to approach someone?
Oh my goodness, do I have thoughts? I'm living in an experience of directly, both as somebody who gets asked to speak at a lot of different events, right? A lot of different topics, but as I'm also organizing the largest Latinx gathering as well, right? So I to all the event planners, I sympathize with you. Trying to get these speakers and confirming the topics and who and what. I see you, and I totally respect and value the work that you're doing, because I'm experiencing that right now. But more specifically, from my end as a diverse speaker in general, I think what has been important for me and has helped me get started in all this is somebody recommended me, right? And so somebody that also, especially to the event organizers, you want to get that one person and they're like, sorry, I can't. But ask them sometimes they might provide you a recommendation, or sometimes they create different opportunities. And that's how I got started in different, going from smaller panels to last year being on the Dreamforce conference, which is the largest tech conference in general, right? And so it was somebody that was able to provide me the opportunity. So I want to make sure that I'm also creating those opportunities for new voices or maybe different perspectives. But on a very tactical perspective, just to share some of my advice of what's happening right in my back end, I look at it in 3 ways. Number one, what is my current priority right now? What's the current message that I'm trying to deliver to the audience? And is your event the right audience for me? And so, for example, right now I'm working on tackling the digital divide, raising awareness of the type of policy change and investment, and trying to get the tech community to have a larger stance on this, as well as bringing in the communities that are impacted, right? And so this is where I would prioritize speaking opportunities where I can have access to those audience, so I can share what is a call to action for us to make that overall change that we want to see, right? And so understanding the current priorities of the speaker. The next part, the next layer that I look at it in prioritization of my opportunities is my expertise also providing a new perspective. So an example, my background is I started as an engineering. And I started, so whenever there's opportunities where I can do tech talks or I can go talk to a technical audience, I love it because that's when I share my own lived journey and be able to very authentically share why DI is so critical and why we need to have, diverse talent at the table creating new technologies. And then lastly, I really love to, I also want to empower and continue to support the communities that I identify with. And so wherever my lived journey could be of motivation, but it could also bring in a different generations and dialogue together. I like to make sure that I'm also sharing that and as they say, like paying it forward, right? Because I started my journey so if my journey can be of value to somebody, I want to make sure it does that. So just sharing that just from a speaker's perspective of what is the prioritization that happens. And I would say just like kind of like a journalist, right? This is my last tip on this is think about it. If you're a journalist, like what is the current moment? Like what's the relevancy of this topic? Is there an opportunity or a new angle, right? In this world of Zooms and different webinars, everything is digital. How is this speaker going to be different? How can we push them also to maybe share something that they haven't shared before to bring in a fresh perspective? And so it's partnerships, it's relationships, but also don't be afraid to give the new face a chance. Sometimes you'll be able to find amazing stories that are even more inspiring than other ones we've heard a couple times.
Love that, Lily. Valerie, Wahab, do you have any other thoughts about best ways to approach diverse speakers to get them on your agenda? Valerie, I see you.
I have two. I'll be really fast. Number one, explain or demonstrate the benefit to the speaker of participating in the event. Number two, if you're an event creator, put together your list of speakers whom you've worked with in the past, either speakers you've sourced or have seen, and share it. Because you're 20 and my 40 and Wahab's 80 and Lily's 1,000, we put them all together in one list. And even though you might think, well, if we've only got one list going around, everyone's going to be overburdened. No, because I only know 20 people on that list and she only knows this segment. And we will be able to find new names, new stories through helping each other, I think, and minimizing the time and effort it takes to find these new voices and stories, which I think is one reason why some folks don't end up highlighting new faces and stories, because it takes a lot of effort and time is a valuable resource right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Bob, any other final thoughts on that one?
Yes, and I mean, no, those are all great points. I think sometimes I also can, even somebody that's coming from sort of like a diverse background, I also can come from a place of privilege. And, for myself personally, I've never had a hard time finding speakers that look like myself. Our community team at URX is predominantly women. We don't have a lot of, issues trying to find women to speak at our events as well. And so, that being said, I think one of the things is we can't lead with the idea of hey, we're asking you to speak because you're diverse, right? Because frankly, earlier in this talk, we've discussed the fact that diversity is intersectional, and depending on who you are, depending on who your audience is, depending on what your agenda is, the definition of that diversity can change. So I think just to kind of give two actionable points, if you are looking for speakers, lead with their expertise. To I think Lily mentioned that, hey, this person is an expert in what your message is, what you're trying to convey for whatever the speaking opportunity is. And then to Vanessa's point, it's okay, you don't want to kind of keep going back to the same well, but you can go back to that well to ask for others, right? If you asked me, hey, Wahab, do you know any recruiting experts? you don't even necessarily need to say recruiting experts of color. But I'm going to say, you know what, I do know some great folks to speak on that topic, and I'm going to recommend some folks who, I want to champion, I want to give an opportunity as well. So those would be some points, some of my takeaways.
Yeah, and I thank you guys for that. I mean, one common theme that I'm hearing is just ask for help. Like, reach out to your partners, reach out to your colleagues and other people, and know your blind spots. Like, if you don't know, a diverse speaker in recruiting, like, you find someone who does, and it's okay to ask for help. And if you don't have a diverse person on your team, and you need a voice, or you don't have the right voice, like, find someone who does, and ask for help and work on this together. So I'm going to close out with on a positive note. Before, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. But so last thing to wrap it up, with each one of you, have two questions. So one, what's something that makes you hopeful for DE&I in the future of the events and conference industry? And two, is there an event that you think is just really doing a great job at this, and really, like, you're impressed by their diversity and inclusion efforts? Obviously, we know all of you are putting on incredible, thoughtful events, so maybe let's think of ones outside of what you guys are doing. But Lily, would love to start with you. What makes you hopeful, and who's someone that you think is doing it great?
Yeah, definitely. What makes me hopeful is that we're having these dialogues. Events like this make me hopeful because we're being able to share our knowledge, share feedback, learn together. In this times that we're in, like, just look at how we're connecting, right? Everybody's learning. Everybody is learning. We're also in the midst of some of the largest social movements for the Black Lives Matter movement, right? We want to make sure that we are, going back to some of the questions that we discussed, that we are acknowledging and being authentic and understanding of how do we even have the dialogue. And so what makes me hopeful is that we're having to start these dialogues. And I hope that more of those executives and CEOs really take this discussion to heart, but move it to action. Because I think especially we also have to acknowledge the current times, just at the macro level of what's happening in this country right now, right? And so having these gatherings where community is what's going to keep us going forward is what keeps me hopeful. Being able to have creatives, being able to have an opportunity, being able to have access to technology, which we need to continue to have, and just put it in a place where we're all in together. We're at different points, but this is really the call to action is coming together in new ways and being as empathetic, but also pushing the dialogue forward to make sure that we are not just doing things to do. Time is, as was shared earlier, time is of the essence. A lot of things are at risk, and so for me, it's like, what's going to be our mark for this historic moment, as individuals, as communities, and especially as the folks who have access to create gatherings like this. Super critical and super powerful. So that's what keeps me motivated and excited, that we're having this type of dialogue more explicitly, that we're having opportunity to have different viewing points to educate everybody. And events are doing it right. Besides ltxfest.com, just sharing it out. Some of the most grassroots ones have been really interesting. I can't recall specific names, but just in the way folks introduce doing land acknowledgements. Specifically, I'm talking of Oakland-based organizations that are working really on the grassroots and seeing them adopt into technology, but yet still making sure that all these different physical traditions and welcomings that they did are still taking place. So I love that, of acknowledging the time, the culture, giving a nod back to the importance of the gathering. Specific organizations, you have to come back to me, because there's been so many like that. There's been so many that I think have been interesting, of the different tools and technologies that they're using to make sure that it's engaging for everybody. That it's not just like, okay, let me watch TV, but there's a way that folks get engaged during the experience as well.
Yeah, love that. Wahab, over to you. What makes you hopeful? And is there a conference that's just really doing well with DE&I?
Yeah, so I mean, the hopeful piece is, like, I love this. I love getting to meet Valerie and Lily, and I think just more opportunities for these types of conversations. I think right now, what's really exciting is that there are a lot of voices that in the past, and for whatever reason, this is a moment and people are more open to hearing them. I think it's going to translate when people realize, wow, there's like a lot of phenomenal people that had been overlooked in the past. And I hope that these opportunities translate beyond diversity conversations or D&I conversations, and over time move more towards business conversations, product conversations. So I'm hopeful for that. I'm excited about that. Just even this experience has been a great one. And then I guess kind of similar to Lily, I almost feel like I'm in this tough spot where it's like whatever I plug, somebody's going to be upset with me. So what I will say is that maybe to take a little bit of a left turn, I think in this digital world that we're in now with COVID right now, I think events equals community. And I'll just plug two communities that my organization works pretty closely with that are helping to get more early in career Black and Brown computer science students, as well as women technologists into the tech industry. And so one is colorstack.org. The founder of that organization and community is Jerron Petty, and the other is Rewriting the Code. The founder of that organization is Sue Harnett. And so ColorStack supports Black and Brown computer science students. Rewriting the Code supports women computer science students, and they're doing a great job with their community and the events off of that.
Awesome. We would love, we can drop some of those resources too in the chat. Valerie, off to you. What makes you hopeful, and is there any event or community, to Wahob's point, that's really doing a great job from a DE&I perspective?
First of all, as an introvert, thank you for allowing me to go last, because I needed to have time to marinate and come up with an answer for you. What makes me hopeful is, yes, to double tap on the fact that we're doing this today. Knowledge is power. And today, more people than ever are seeking knowledge and sharing knowledge. This is one instance of both happening at the same time. So this makes me hopeful, because this is not the only instance of this happening right now. Mm-hmm. Versions of this are happening all over the place. Thank you to the technology companies who provide us with the opportunity and the tools to do it. And to the other companies who fund the possibility for others to be able to do it even when they can't pay for it themselves. I'm also hopeful because I see change behind the scenes and in front, like behind the camera, in front of the camera, back of house, front of house. I'm seeing change on all sides. Shout out to the Procore Groundbreak team. Groundbreak is our user conference that's happening annually, and this year it's virtual, and they are super intentional about who we're centering, who's being represented, and how we experience it. And I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised my first time participating in SaaStr this year, because we were able to see the importance of diversity in messaging without having to have it plastered all over a panel, that this panel is about diversity. This panel is about making money, making moves, building business, doing whatever. And it just happens to be a phenomenal panel full of people of color, or women, or young people, or older people, or second, third career people, whatever it is. Because community building is important. Social empowerment is important. Economic empowerment is just as important. We need both. We need all, right? And so let's find a way to uplift all of those stories through different voices to accomplish all of our goals, no matter how diverse those goals are.
Yeah, love that. Man, now I'm inspired. You guys are what make me hopeful too. So this has been such an amazing conversation. We do have maybe 2 minutes for a couple of questions. So feel free, if you're tuning in, to drop in any of your questions for our amazing panelists. And we will make sure to get those in. Just some of the takeaways that I'm having from this conversation is just remembering as event organizers that, like Lily was saying, we're designers, we're experienced designers. So think about, what do you want out of this experience? What are you presenting, and who are you presenting to? And to Valerie's point, who's the opposite of not of what you're presenting, of who's not maybe missing? And is there something else that could be missing from your messaging? Asking for help, reach out to partners, reach out to other people on your team, other people who have a different experience than you, to give that different lens. And I just love Valerie's like tweetable message of don't make diversity a side dish. I think that that's just like something we can take away from everything, whether that's with speakers, whether it's with your planning, your process, anything, just like make sure that it's not just something that you're adding on, that it really is core to what you do, and you're living and breathing it. So love all of that. Can't thank you all enough. Let's see if we have any questions. Nancy's asking, I asked a very impressive female entrepreneur to speak at my conference 3 times. She told me she gets asked 4 to 10 times a day to speak, and that she did not see the benefit of speaking at my tech conference because she was looking to raise capital. Would only speak if we paid a high fee and expenses. How would you handle it? Any thoughts?
Maybe I should go. I'm happy to take this one, but I'd love to hear from others as well, since it's. I guess
I can share a quick example. Just in the LTX Fest that we're in the midst of organizing, we've had amazing folks, right? That we put out a list, and then some of the folks that some of them didn't, like I would say some of the bigger names didn't even ask for speaking fees. So it's this question, I think it's really interesting. There are some folks who do, I mean, a lot of the time this is an income for some speakers, or it has become, but I also want to make sure that, especially being able to understand that there's been a lot of discrepancy and lack of transparency on speaking engagement and fees. And so specifically when you take a look at women of color, just because you don't ask doesn't mean that there's no budget for it, right? And so I think that there's I think it's a good dialogue to have. And for best practices, I would say that to Nancy, I think being able to have an opportunity where, like, here's a speaking opportunity, there's an honorarium, this is the range, just try to be as clear from the beginning as possible to make sure that you're also respecting each other's time, right? Because it has to be both mutually. But this, as I'm learning as well, right, there's been this, like, if you don't ask, you don't get type of thing, or like, and sometimes the same folks that tend to, and not saying that that's right. I think that the challenge is that this is a new space and environment that I think also requires more equity discussions in general about pay, especially as we take a look by women speakers levels versus other speakers and experience and whatnot. But I would just say be as transparent as possible from the beginning. Say, like, here's our budget, like, here's the range, we'd love to have it. And then that way you can both be respectful to each other, and also there's a timeliness factor.
Anything else from anyone? Any other thoughts to add on? We have one more.
I think my thought is just that basically I would just remove the descriptors. We all run events, we all run conferences, and look, like, if I want to go book, I don't know, Hillary Clinton to speak at my event, I can't afford that.
Right.
That's okay. If I want to go book Bill Clinton, can't afford that either, and that's okay. So I don't think that whether somebody is a minority or a woman or whatever class should be a factor in how you just approach it the same way you would approach somebody who has a speaking fee that's maybe out of your budget, and you would ask graciously, hey, really love to have you. We can't afford that. Here's what we can afford. Or, hey, we don't pay speaking fees. For our events, if they're community driven, we don't pay speaking fees, and be upfront with that. And then if it's not a good fit, who would you recommend? Like, the reason we're reaching out is because you have this expertise, you have this profile, and we really love that, and we want that to be represented. Is there anyone that you could recommend to us who maybe can provide that same perspective, and go from there?
Yeah, we all have limited budgets, right? Sometimes we just work out.
If I could just add one more thing, I would also encourage everyone to, yes, remember that some people ask for money because they charge for their time. Others don't charge for their time. keeping in mind your expectations around whether someone can or cannot, should or should not charge for their time, and your transparency around your budgeting will be crucial. Expecting people to be able to offer their time freely for no money may find you leaning toward this group of speakers and not this group of speakers. So understand what your expectations are and understand that there's always someone who's going to blow them up, right? I want to encourage us all to remember, and I'm going to put my hat on as a Reiki master now, money is a transference of energy. There are many different ways we can transfer energy. A gift, a speaking engagement, is us giving you our energy. So it is normal to expect an exchange of energy in return. What energy are you going to give in return? Money is one form. Helping someone is another. All are valid.
All right. Thank you guys so much. We have one more we're just over time, but I want to take this question from Crystal. Any tips for how to facilitate connection right now in this weird virtual world?
Gosh, I think we're all struggling with this.
I know. I'd say, things like this. Kind of put yourself out there, be willing to, I know we're all feeling the Zoom fatigue, but make sure that you are still connecting with people, because I think it can be a kind of the opportunity to maybe retreat right now. But I think that now it's really important to make sure that you are still attending virtual events, that you are still finding those opportunities for engagement. And we're not fully shutting down, even as much as we are ready for those in-person events to be in, to really take advantage of it and kind of have an open mind with virtual too.
I also love podcasts. They're not interactive, but I'm still hearing a conversation of sorts. And listening to books as opposed to reading them, it still feels like I'm with another person. And so there are different layers of interaction and connection that you can develop. That may be one less taxing way to feel like you're connected than, say, being on a Zoom. And then starting with how you're connecting with yourself before you connect with others. How are you connecting with yourself? Because that shows you who you're showing up as when you seek to connect with others, and that impacts how or whether we can connect with others. Not sure that's where you want to take it, but
no, I love it.
I would also just briefly share to just acknowledge, again, we're all in this new world I like using the quote of stop playing defense and move to offense. You only win games when you score. And the only way to score points is to move in offense, right? And so that means that we got to rethink how we do things moving forward and not feel that we have to get stuck to the way we used to do things in the past, right? And so that means even that the way we look and the way we show up, the music, how you started, be as creative as possible. There's a viral post, I think, a post that went viral of somebody an executive changing their picture from being so polished to just being this is what I look like when I jump into the Zooms, of this more unpolished and just more real. And so I think having spaces where you have the dialogue and just show up as who you really are. We've been talking about this whole thing of bring your full self to work. Well, now we're doing that, and the kids come, and the parents, the dogs, everything, the gardeners, right? And so if those things happen, just go with it. I think being able to just be able to embrace this new reality as empathetic and as human as possible is the way that we're going to continue to make these types of connections actually work. Besides, we can meet in person. There's also different tools that I'm going to give a quick shout out. Since I'm at the backstage for the LTX Fest right now, we have the CTO from Latinas in Tech sitting across here, and she did an amazing job of selecting this tool that I was not familiar, called Brella.io, that has a lot of great interactivity for connecting one-on-one meetings and following up and network. So we're going to experiment that with our event as well. And so putting it out there for folks who want to find different ways and applications, and be creative with it. Test it out and let your audience know, hey, we're trying this thing together too. May have bugs. We don't know. We'll figure out, but let's all learn together.
Yeah, plus one. I think the formatting of your events as well, you can kind of tweak them a little bit with video, with Zoom, even in terms of more roundtable discussions, and you maybe limit it to like smaller, 15 to 20 people and like a series of sorts where people kind of have multiple opportunities across maybe an industry to discuss different topics within it. And you're sort of meeting different people are able to kind of share a little bit about themselves while engaging in the conversation. And then if you do have a community piece with your event strategy, thinking about, how do you create some of that happenstance meetings? So there's some, we use a Slack, and there are products that will kind of on a timely basis create sort of introductions, right? So, and it's pretty low lift, whether you once a month or once a quarter, you get a new introduction with somebody who's kind of in this similar space with you. So those are some things I've seen work pretty well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We are at time. Thank you everyone who attended, and thank you to Lily, Valerie, and Wahab for your wisdom and all your insights. It was just such a great conversation, and we could do an iteration of this, I feel like, in the future too, as we all kind of continue to learn. So appreciate you all so much. And then everyone tuning in, we'll be sharing all these assets later with you, but definitely would love to connect with everyone. So thank you again for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.